You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Cricket Podcast, where today, unfortunately, we're going to be talking about the cancelled fifth test between England and India, a fixture that was supposed to be played at Old Trafford today. Right now, they should be out for the afternoon session. However, unfortunately, because of a COVID outbreak among the Indian coaching and support staff, the Indian players made a decision to pull out. My name is Jack Hope. I'm joined by Nakul Pande to go over all of this. Nakul, how are you doing?
Yeah, it's a complicated question on a day like today. I'm doing okay considering.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, we would rather the cricket was on and nobody was ill. Obviously, that goes without saying. But we've got our weekend back, so that's the plus side. Just a reminder before we get into everything, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at the Cricket Pod, or on Patreon. .com/the Cricket Pod if you want to give to the show directly and get some benefits there. And our sponsor is Woodstock Cricket. Onto the topic of the day, though, Nakul. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to run through the version of events as I roughly understand it to be, and then if there's anything that you think we should add, we'll get to that, and then we'll talk about some of the implications for all of this. So the story, as we're told, is that sometime around midnight last night, the India team got together after the COVID outbreak that I spoke about, which has seen their head coach, other coaches, both their physios go down with COVID. So the India team got together and signed a letter to their board saying that they would not be willing to play in this fifth test match. Around 8 a.m. this morning, that news leaked out to journalists on Twitter. So I'm thinking specifically of George DeBell here, who basically warned people, don't come to the game. It's not going to be played. Following that, it was confirmed that the match had been cancelled. I think that was sometime around 9 a.m. This morning. Now, initially, the ECB said that the match had been forfeited by India. However, that was amended. And I'll just read the statement as it is, or part of the statement as it is now. So following ongoing conversations with the BCCI, the ECB can confirm that the fifth test between England and India men, due to start today at Emirates Old Trafford, will be cancelled. Due to fears of further increase in the number of COVID cases inside the camp, India are regrettably unable to field a team. We send our sincere apologies to fans and partners for this news, which we know will cause immense disappointment and inconvenience to many. Further information will be shared in due course. So that went out. That created a lot of conjecture. The BCCI have issued their own statement. It's a little bit longer, but I'll run through it now so that we have the actual facts of the discussion, as it were, and then we'll try and fill in some of the gaps around that, I think. So their statement reads, the Board of Control for Cricket in India, along with the England and Wales Cricket Board, have jointly decided to call off the fifth test scheduled at Manchester in the ongoing India's tour of England 2021. The BCCI and ECB held several rounds of discussion to find a way to play the test match. However, the outbreak of COVID in the Indian team contingent forced the decision of calling off the Old Trafford test match. In lieu of the strong relationship between the BCCI and ECB, the BCCI has offered to the ECB to reschedule the test. Both the boards will work towards finding a window to reschedule this test match. The BCCI has always maintained that the safety and well-being of the players is of paramount importance, and there will be no compromise on that aspect. The BCCI would like to thank the ECB for their cooperation and understanding in these trying times. We would like to apologise to the fans for not being able to complete an enthralling series. And so, Nakul, I think that's where we are at so far. I don't know if there's anything any colour you can add to the bare facts of the information that we have.
Yeah, that is where we are, and it's way down the priority list, but the result of this fifth test match, whether it is postponed or cancelled or forfeited, and thus the result of this series and thus any World Test Championship points, is yet to be decided. That will be decided by the ICC in conjunction with the match referee. There is some potential that the cancellation due to a COVID outbreak is an allowed reason to stop a test match according to the World Test Championship playing conditions, although that is not 100% confirmed. the talk of the window, India's men are here in England next summer for a white ball series, sandwiched in between multi-format fall tours by New Zealand and by South Africa. That would seem to be the window, although again, the schedules being as they are for England's and India's men's team, given that the finances of world cricket are such that England and India are relied upon to make up a lot of shortfalls in other boards' budgets, the window is quite tight, but it could exist. So we could see the test specialists joining the white ball team next year, which we'd imagine would be a full-strength white ball team, particularly the T20 squad ahead of another T20 World Cup, and then play that test match rather at Old Trafford. Now, there's some confusion because of whether this will be this fifth test, as it were, this fifth test of this series counting towards World Test Championship points, because it's within the window. But Tom Harrison, the ECB CEO, and Michael Atherton on Sky were both suggesting that it would be a standalone game, in effect, an exhibition game to fill the financial hole, essentially, left by the cancellation of this game, which will be somewhat filled in terms of insurance for the ECB, because they'll have to refund all ticket holders, and there'll have to be payments made out to vendors and to stewards and so forth, and all the other people, and broadcasters as well, will get some kind of rebate back on their rights. So it's a mess, as any cancellation of a major sporting event is. So there's some conjecture as to whether it does happen, and I understand that both teams want it to happen, and my suspicion at this stage is that there's too much money involved for it not to happen. But there's some confusion as to whether it will be a continuation of this series or a standalone test match. In terms of the colour, so yes, Ravi Shastri, apparently after a book launch that he attended, test positive rather on a rapid test on a lateral flow, which then gets confirmed by a PCR test. His close contacts are identified as the bowling coach Bharat Arun, the fielding coach R. Sridhar, the head physio Nitin Patel. Now, some of those then tests, so that those people then have to isolate. Nitin Patel, I understand, then tested negative on a PCR test in between the two test matches, so travelled up with the team to Manchester, but is staying on a different floor of the hotel as a contingency, and as a precaution. This means that during the fourth test, when there were a number of players, Ravindra Jadeja, Jiteshwar Pujara, Rohit Sharma, Mohammad Shami, Ashant Sharma, who for definite we know had some injuries that needed to be treated by the physio, Yogesh Parmar, and it's a test match. It's the end of it's 4 test matches. 2 pairs of back-to-back test matches. There's no doubt there would have been other players, particularly fast bowlers, dealing with something, and the physio's rooms are busy in test matches. He then tests positive in between the 2 test matches. The rest of the touring party undergo, I think, 2 rounds of PCR testing as well as lateral flow testing. There are test results from the second round, which they did last night, due to come back today. And part of the problem is, and Dinesh Karthik, I think, said this very well on Sky, had it been someone else, someone who is less hands-on with the team, so had it been the media manager, had it been the security manager, had it been the someone in the logistics side, had it been the throwdown person, it might not have been so bad. But the physio is incredibly hands-on with the players. He cannot do his job if he's not hands-on with the players.
If we can break that, I can read out what Dinesh Karthik said to Sky, just because I think that is quite illuminating in this story. He says, I spoke to a few of the guys. The general feeling is that after the 4th test, the players said, this is tiring. Almost all of the games have gone to the wire. They're tired and they want to, and they were down to one physio. So they've done a lot of work with this man, and now he tests positive. Now that is the problem. If it was someone else who worked on logistics or something, they wouldn't be this afraid. But because it's the physio, that's why they've got the jitters, which basically backs up what you're saying there. It's that they're genuinely worried, or it appears that the Indian players are genuinely worried that they have been exposed to the virus. Or
that they could be, because
yes, or it could be passed on.
A negative test now is great. The worry is, as expressed by some people close to the players, is that what happens if, due to the incubation period of the COVID virus, 2-3 days into the test match, someone who's been having treatment, someone who's had close contact with Yogesh Parmar before the test match, then test positive in the middle of the test match, which is bad in itself because there are provisions in the ICC regulations for COVID substitutes. Although I honestly can't see how that can be realistically a possibility if someone does go down from the playing 11 in the middle of a test match. But there we are. But it's not as though there's a break here. Actually, no. Let's move on. We'll come to the IPL later. But these players have been in this bubble, just this bubble, since the middle of May, from the start of the World Test Championship final, the lead up to it. They had a couple of weeks in the middle of June, where they got a little bit of time off. In which period actually a few of the players and the support staff also got COVID. But they're then looking, if they test positive now, that's another 10 days in isolation before they can leave the UK to go to the UAE for the IPL, which then leads on to the T20 World Cup, which then leads on to the winter tours, where I think they're playing New Zealand at home and South Africa away. On the other side of this, before the World Test Championship final, they had the breakup of the IPL bubble, which was traumatic for a number of these players. To take an example, R. Ashwin, 10 members of his family got COVID inside a week, his and his wife's family. And that's the reason he was one of the first players to pull out of the IPL, precipitating the collapse of that bubble, which has meant that the second half of the IPL had to be slotted into this very small gap between the end of this England-India Test series and the start of the T20 World Cup. And then before the IPL, they were in some kind of bubble for the England-India series in India. Then before that, they'd been in Australia for several months. Now, not all of these players, but the bulk of these players, the majority of these players have been, if you cast it back, in fact, to the IPL in the UAE last year, it's over a year. And I think the phrase "at the end of their tether" was used a few times in various media this morning, and you can understand why that is. So I think that the additional, while this in itself might not be so much of an issue in isolation, it's come on the back of all of this, and so it takes something big for international athletes who are pathologically competitive, who are absolutely committed to putting themselves out there, putting their bodies on the line, regardless of quite serious long-term risks in some cases to their physical health, who go through things that most people wouldn't consider going through in order to do their job and in order to win and in order to be seen to win. It comes to something when those players are saying to their board, "No, we can't do this. We won't do this." And this is a group of players that doesn't have a players' union, by the way. They are, in theory, putting themselves at risk by going against the wishes of their board. So it was a pretty extraordinary set of circumstances that have been going on for a long time.
Absolutely, I'm reminded sort of when you talk about that of the documentary The Edge, and there's a short interview in that with Kevin Peterson where he talks about being on tour with England, I think for 150 days, waking up, putting the tracksuit on, going to training, meeting the same people, going back to your hotel, taking the tracksuit off, going to bed, waking up, putting the tracksuit back on, and that's in a period of time when players did have a bit of free time. You could go to a restaurant, you could go to a bar on your day off, you could. I don't know, get involved with saving the rhinos, whatever it is that floated your boat. And he was talking about how that was mentally taxing. The situation for this India team, I think you have to be, or it's very difficult to be anything other. I think anything other than the sympathetic towards these players, if you know the whole backstory. I mean, there's some ridiculous things, and we'll cover this now, and then we'll talk about the outcomes, because they're not the only ones who lose. But there's one of the things that annoyed me this morning was on the BBC's reporting of this cancellation. There was an attached comment from Jonathan Agnew about how this was actually because all the players just wanted to go and play in the IPL, and I think that's one of the most one-eyed takes you can possibly have on that. Not just for the reasons that you sort of mentioned there, or the obvious reasons that you've elaborated on very clearly there, and the mental stress that this situation will have caused for these Indian players, and the fear that they might actually catch quite a serious illness here, but also because, looking forward to the IPL, that is their job. If at my actual day job, I was exposed to people who had COVID, and I said I am reluctant to come into the office tomorrow because I have been exposed to people who have COVID. My job, the people who work there, or my boss would be sympathetic towards that. So you're looking at a situation like that effectively for these players. If they do test positive, or if they do get sick, then they will lose out on work going towards the IPL. And for some of them, they may also potentially lose out on the possibility of playing at the World Cup, which follows on from that. I think it's, that point about pathological competitiveness. I mean, I can't imagine there's anyone in the world who would want this match to be played more than Virat Kohli. I don't know if you had a take on the IPL thing. I mean, it's caused some quite bitter friction, I think, between different demographics of fans on social media.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite right to and necessary to include it as a factor in the sense of the scheduling, and in the sense of the fact that partly due to COVID, which has meant that boards want to recoup as much money as possible, and partly due to the skewed finances of world cricket, and partly due to I think it was Emma John who wrote a good piece in The Guardian about the endless growth cycle, the endless growth myth that a lot of sport has got itself into, and this is part of it, although the sporting bodies are bought into. I look at England and India's schedules for the men over the next few years, and it's exhausting just reading it.
We knew you were going through it, and it takes about 5 minutes to tell you where they've both been in the last 12 months. And then when you were trying to explain where to fit this potential rescheduled test into England's summer next year, there's about 5 different teams involved. There's multiple different competitions. There's 3 formats of cricket. There's the 100.
All
the IPL before
there's
that.
All the venues, and there's the women's international cricket, and all of that to fit in. But on the 100, by the way, India the BCCI had made representations to try and move this series forward a little bit, or back, I suppose, a little bit, to have a less of a break between the World Test Championship final and the start of this series, to allow a slightly longer time before the IPL. That wasn't possible because the ECB wanted to have a clear window for the launch of the 100. Would argue the merits of that, however you like, and then argue the merits of the competition however much you like. But that's the situation. Everyone is kind of protecting their own financial interests, inevitably in a situation like this. I mean, as far as the sort of they just want the IPL money thing, and I'm simplifying that point of view a little bit. I wasn't listening to TMS, so I don't know in what context Jonathan Agnew was saying that, because the way this works is they basically verbatim transcribe whatever is being said as part of a fairly lengthy discussion, because TMS were on air for quite a long time before the start and after the cancellation. So I don't know in what context that was said. I don't know in what tone that was said. So I can't fully comment on that. But it's an easy target. And I know Michael Vaughan was similarly on Test Match Special, talking a lot about the IPL, although he did, in a perhaps rare moment of balance, talk about the fact that England cut and run from South Africa extremely quickly after a game was cancelled at an hour's notice. But he was also talking about the IPL. And I can understand that people are frustrated. I'm very frustrated the fact that we don't get a proper end to this series, and we're having to potentially discuss the outcome of this amazing series through sporting courts, essentially, or sporting arbitration. Well, it might not get that far, but it's certainly it's by going through playing conditions with a fine-tooth comb, rather than, as everyone, including the aforementioned pathologically competitive players, want to have it settled on field. Because let's say that this series ends here and the 5th test is declared null and void. India win the series, but there's always going to be the asterisk, and they'll know that, as much as they might, and I think this is more of an asterisk in a sense than, for example, I don't know whether New Zealand are the best team in the world because they won the World Test Championship final, or the outcome of the men's 2019 World Cup final, which are determined by on-field matters. And so, people say, "Oh, India winning in Australia in 2018 when Smith and Warner weren't available," or whatever it might be. All of these caveats that you can put on whatever achievement you like. I think this almost does. This would carry a more significant asterisk, and the players would be aware of that. I mean, I don't think that you would. You can say that India have played very, very well in this series, and they won 2 fantastic Test matches at Lords and the Oval, but it won't feel the same as far as we can possibly tell from everything that we know about these players, including Virat Kohli, whose passion for Test cricket and his awareness of the role that it plays in sporting greatness, in cricketing greatness, is absolutely inarguable. I mean, I think sometimes it's actually argued too much. The idea that Virat Kohli is single-handedly propping up Test cricket isn't true any more than the idea that these Indian players don't care about Test cricket is. And as far as the IPL has a lot of moving parts. I mean, there are 9 English players, including a number in this squad. So Chris Wokes, Moeen Ali, Sam Curran, Dalvin Milan, Johnny Bairstow, and then outside of this squad, Chris Jordan, Sam Billings, and Owen Morgan, and Liam Livingston, and Adil Rashid. So 10. And Tom Curran, I think, as well. So 11 players who are going to that IPL. There are players from all over the world who have been in bubbles in the UAE and could potentially have that jeopardized by people coming from England with COVID, and then what happens? And then what's the knock-on effect on the T20 World Cup? I mean, it doesn't. The administrators are rightly worried about things like that. The players, from everything that I have heard from people who are close to the Indian team and people who are traveling around with this group, is that the players were not thinking quite that far ahead. They were thinking, we do not feel safe playing this Test match, and as I say, it takes a pretty extraordinary state of affairs when players at the top of their sport strongly consider not playing a game and going against the wishes of their own board to do so.
Yeah, no, I think that sort of covers it from the players' point of view. It obviously will be, and both official statements did allude to this, but right at the end of both of them, it'll obviously be quite disappointing for the fans. They're the slightly more hidden victim in this, in that there are, I think, 63,000 people who had tickets for the first 3 days here, had plans to meet friends, had plans, and probably in a lot of cases had plans to meet, friends or family members they hadn't seen for quite a long time. We are still just really emerging from a lockdown here in the UK. And this series has been quite cathartic for people who have been able to go along to the games, to actually enjoy something normal for the first time in 18 months or 2 years in some cases. There's going to be a lot of individuals that lose out there. I'm not really sure there's that much that can be done for them once the players decide that they can't play, though, Nakul.
I saw the Barmy Army made a statement this morning saying how disappointing it was that it was cancelled so last minute. I think it was cancelled just before the gates officially opened, which is absolutely right. And it is incredibly disappointing and incredibly frustrating for people. There were people who were either on their way to the ground or already at the ground. People who've booked, they'll get their money back for the tickets, but they're probably not going to get their money back for the trains, for the hotels, for and things like that, for the time off work, if people have taken time off work, which they will for today and for days 4 and 5, the Monday and Tuesday. And they've been immensely inconvenienced and immensely frustrated. A number of these people going to this game are people who booked tickets pre-pandemic for last year's match at Old Trafford, the Pakistan Test match, but then those tickets got rolled over to this year. The next Test match at Old Trafford, unless this one happens next year between England and India, which might well happen to forestall this, is 2023. So you end up with people waiting 4 years potentially between Test matches at Old Trafford. And yes, they can go elsewhere, but why? It's the ground in that part of the country. Not everyone's going to want. You shouldn't have to travel 100 miles or whatever, or several hundred miles to go and see a Test match in this country. So I completely share the frustration, and I don't know though what else could have been done apart from better communication, which is always a possibility. But then I also don't know how you communicate this situation live while it's happening without, as what happened last night and this morning, just creating panic and confusion on Twitter with all sorts of rumors flying around and people saying, blue tick accounts, saying things are official when they're not official, in the rush to break the story and in the rush to be seen to be right. And the last night and this sort of from about sort of 7:30 to about 9:00 was just an immensely confusing time to be on cricket Twitter this morning. And I was thinking very small things. I had to travel across London this morning to go to the Gorilla Cricket Studios to open it up and get the show on the road. I didn't end up going because I was trying to delay, and I didn't end up going. Had I gone, that'd have been a wasted bus journey. But that extrapolate that out to people traveling from other parts of the north of England, other parts of the country, to go to Manchester and booking their hotels, and then extrapolate that out by tens of thousands, and it is an immensely frustrating time. But also, the players aren't doing this to screw anyone over. I understand the frustration, but I think some of the takes that have come as a result of that and not acknowledge that they've come out of frustration, I think don't need to be taken all that seriously.
Yeah. I think, we covered for probably 20 minutes at the beginning of this episode, or this discussion, why it's not really that unreasonable that you, if you were an Indian player right now, you might not want to play a test match. Anyway, we had some questions on from Twitter. Janil asks, since the series was affected because strict bio bubbles were not in place, do you think the ECB will go back to the older style of strict bubble? My take on that would be absolutely not. I think the players hated them so much that they'd probably refuse to play any test matches if they were.
It's not going to happen.
Go back into that.
They're just not feasible anymore. They were barely feasible towards the end of last year. And the players immediately, as they came out of the bubble, the two bubbles, the red ball and white ball bubble, this is the England players, said, we're not doing that again. The Indian players nearly, the last test in India nearly got cancelled. Oh, sorry, between India and Australia nearly got cancelled because the Indian players had to go back into a strict bio bubble because of local lockdowns in Australia, and were then immensely frustrated when they were in lockdowns for 10 days in the middle of the tour, but there were still fans in the stadium. They've had to go back into a stricter bubble for this test match because in order to go to the UAE without quarantining on the other end, they have to go bubble to bubble. So I think actually that sometimes you either have strict bio bubbles for lengthy tours, which is basically not possible, because it's just not fair on players and their families who will often tour with them. Or you have situations where, having come out of a bubble, you go back into one in the middle of a tour, which is, in a way, I'd imagine even more mentally draining. I've not been in a cricket bubble. I've done all of my cricket reporting and commentating remotely from London. But I know from journalists and broadcasters who've been in the bubbles that they were heartily sick of them, even after just a relatively brief period of time. So no, there is no way of going back to strict bio bubbles. And what might happen is, if the COVID situation, if we go into a fifth, I can't remember which wave we're on now. If we go into another wave next year, you'll have games just not happening for a little while at least. The players can only be expected to put up with so much, and they've put up with a hell of a lot already. And that's not just the England and Indian players. Take an illustrative example. Even before the situation became so dire in Afghanistan, Rashid Khan has spent a lot of time in bio bubbles all over the world, and how he has dealt with it, and how other players on the T20 circuit who have to travel a lot and be in various types of bubbles, how you cope with that and maintain your good humor and your sanity, let alone your performance, is really quite incredible. England, the ECB said last year, if we don't put in place measures to manage players' workloads and give them breaks from the bubble, it will shorten careers. We've seen what's happened to Ben Stokes this summer. It's a minor miracle that's not happened to more players. So no, in answer to your question, there's no. I don't think there's any realistic prospect of very tight bubbles again, and it's just up to players and staff to exercise some responsibility. Now, they were allowed to go to this book launch. Maybe they shouldn't have been, but
I think there's some debate around that. So I think the BCCI cleared them, but didn't clear it with the ECB. Now I don't know whether the ECB would have said no. I don't really know how those discussions happen.
But I was going to say as a courtesy, but I don't know how courteous anyone was particularly willing to be about this book launch of Ravi Shastri's book that he and a number of the other players apparently attended. And I can understand some frustration with the BCCI on that, and God knows I'm very rarely in a position where I defend the BCCI because they frequently do things that are absolutely indefensible and hold an indefensibly powerful position along with their lackeys at the ECB and Cricket Australia within world cricket. But no, I think that the strict not allowed out of your room bubbles aren't coming back.
And they probably shouldn't. Well, I mean, they almost certainly shouldn't. This is one of the reasons why the Ashes might not go ahead, because Australia effectively want the England team, if they come, to potentially come alone, to spend 2 weeks in, a maybe windowless hotel room before the tour kicks off, and then more or less remain in a bubble for that tour. And you can see that the English players, apparently 10 of them, aren't interested in that. And the final point we should mention, I think we will do a deeper talk on this. That is the report that Yorkshire released today. So Prash has brought this up in the questions, and it does feel a bit like it's been buried under everything else we've talked about. Nakul, I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look through much of it yet, or I've read a couple of the very brief statements that have been issued by both sides. And I saw Nasser Hussain talk quite eloquently about this and how after everything Azim Rafiq's been through, he deserved an actual day, a moment where the attention is actually turned towards that situation, rather than us talking about a cancelled test match, or even if it hadn't been cancelled, the first day of a test match. I don't know if there's anything you've seen in that so far.
Yeah, so Yorkshire have released essentially a sort of 8-page précis of the investigatory panel's report and their recommendations into the allegations made by Azim Rafiq of institutional racism dating back basically throughout his decade or more at Yorkshire County Cricket Club and in their youth group setups. He went public with this over a year ago, I think 370 something days since he spoke to, I think initially the Cricket Badger podcast, James Butler's podcast, then Taha Hashim at Wisden, and then George de Bell, which eventually got Yorkshire moving when it got into the larger cricket press. They appointed a law firm which the current chair used to be a partner of to convene a panel, which had some good people on it, but then some people who's it turns out were complicit in not listening to Azim Rafiq first time round, and that's all public domain. So I'm not making any conspiracy theories. They apparently took a very long time getting their report done. They didn't have the access that they wanted. They didn't speak to some of the players who Azim Rafiq named and some of the other people that Azim Rafiq named. They've not kept Azim in the loop throughout. That's they being the panel and the club. Eventually, the report, after nearly a year, goes to the club. Forgive the lengthy answer, but I think it's worth laying out this timeline. It then goes to the club, who, because of the scope of the report, because of the fact that it's essentially not legally binding, hold on to it for fear that if they release it unredacted, they're going to get sued for libel, because of the scope of the report. The full report still hasn't emerged. What we have now is this summary of a report, which has come out after 3 weeks of them having the full report, and doing who knows what with it. Pressure from the ECB, pressure from government, and frankly, when a Tory government minister is pulling you up for your lack of response to racism, you know something is wrong. Not that we didn't already, but yeah, the Department of Culture, Media and Sport head of the Select Committee, Julian Knight, has been pushing them in public. Again, haven't kept Azim Rafiq in the loop with this at all. He found out that this was going to be released 2 minutes before it was actually released, as Azim has said today, and it's very basic. They're very keen to say that of the many allegations, most of them were found to be without basis or couldn't find enough evidence. The recommendations at the end are weak and very impersonal. For example, the conclusion reads, "The panel was mindful that there are a substantial number of recommendations that are large for a business the size of Yorkshire County Cricket Club. The panel expressed its hopes, however, that this will be seen as an opportunity for the club to become a beacon of true inclusivity and foster a culture of excellence in the space. The panel recognises the club is a relatively small employer, but its brand is global, and as such it has a significant responsibility and opportunity. The panel believes that there is an opportunity for the club to reach out to senior Asian ex-professional players and community leaders to be role models and foster a greater sense of trust and engagement. The panel is clear in its aim and in making these recommendations that hopefully this investigation, review and the recommendations will help cricket become more inclusive in its entirety for individuals, whatever their nationality, race, religion, age, gender, disability or experience, which is pretty boilerplate. Quite apart from the idea that Yorkshire would now get senior Asian ex-professionals and community leaders to come on and essentially be the face of their anti-racism campaigns now is laughable and a bit insulting, to be honest.
There's a lot of stuff a bit like that in there as well. I was looking through it, and that they acknowledge that there's quite a lot of occasions where they acknowledge that they did something wrong, but they don't do it anymore. So don't worry about that. The one about halal food.
Yeah.
When he was a junior, wasn't provided with halal food, but that doesn't happen anymore. So we're just not going to worry about that.
Yeah. Forget about all of the damage that was done to Azim Rafiq and other South Asian players and other Muslim players through not having their needs met. And how many people have we never heard of because they didn't manage to get through all of that to the level that Azim Rafiq got. It mentions three. This is the headline recommendations, the stuff on the not the recommendations, the outcomes. 3 separate incidents of racist language used by former players, a former coach regularly using racist language before 2012. Between 2016 and 2018, jokes made around religion which made individuals uncomfortable about their religious practices. References to Azim Rafiq's weight and fitness that amounted to bullying. When Azim Rafiq raised concerns of racism, there was a failure by the club to follow its own policy. It doesn't make any mention, by the way, of whether those policies were in any way adequate. And finally, that, quote, on a number of occasions prior to 2018, the club could have done more to make Muslims more welcome within their stadiums and should have dealt better with complaints of racist or antisocial behaviour within those stadiums. There's nothing concrete about what is going to be done to stop that happening again. And there isn't anything... There's nothing in there which would really give me confidence to suggest that any lessons have been learned. And again, this is not the full report. I don't know if we'll ever see the full report unless it comes to a government inquiry which isn't covered by, which has a defence against libel regulations. And people might say, don't name names or whatever. This isn't a witch hunt, but there could well be, possibly still are. I don't want to go any stronger than that because I don't know, but you can draw your own conclusions. Senior figures still at the club who have decision-making power over senior professionals and over people coming up through the system and over fans who have been guilty of racist behaviour and racist attitudes, or not addressing racist behaviour and racist attitudes, not taking concerns seriously when raised. Yorkshire's conduct throughout this has absolutely done them no favours, and it's been immensely hard on Azim Rafiq, and I think Nasser Hussein's absolutely right that releasing it on the morning of a test match, it might actually have got less attention had the test match not been cancelled. the journalists wouldn't have had the time because they're dealing with the on-diary stuff. Maybe it was, it was scheduled in advance and whatever, but they've had this report for 3 weeks. I don't have a lot of sympathy with Yorkshire regarding the timing of this. And, it's good that we're seeing something, I guess, but and it's a bit stronger than their initial statement, which just glossed over everything as inappropriate behaviour, which, as Nasser Hussain said on Sky this morning, was Robert Croft cutting holes in Duncan Fletcher's socks. That inappropriate behaviour is is what you might
trainers to the floor, like it's...
or something like that, or hiding someone's kit. It's not systemic racist abuse, or calling, or to talk about something we know has definitely happened, calling every Brown player Steve, regardless of what their actual name is, or a player walking out with the team which has four South Asian players saying there are too many of you, which we know happened in 2006 when Adil Rashid, Azim Rafiq, Rana Naveed and Ajmal Shehzad were in the team. These are things that we know happened. And so I'm glad that eventually something has come out, but it's taken concerted pressure and it's taken far too long, and it doesn't appear to go nearly far enough. And I've spoken to Azim Rafiq a couple of times in the last few months, and I know from people who speak to him regularly how big a toll this has taken on him during the time of this investigation and before. You go back to the interviews he did with James, with Taha, with George, and what he suffered and what was said to him and done to him when he brought up his suffering, not just as a result of racist abuse, but his personal circumstances. My heart goes out to him, and it's not a big leap to suggest that other players are going through what he has gone through and are continuing to, and unfortunately may well continue to if this is the attitude that a major cricketing organisation in this country is taking. And I hope that the ECB and the government do push ahead with their plans to hold Yorkshire to even greater scrutiny.
Yeah, and I echo that. Nakul, thank you for joining us. We've done a slightly longer than expected, as usual on this podcast. I don't think we've ever quite stick to the scheduled amount of time that we put in the diary for this sort of thing. Do you want to let people know where to find you and so on? And hopefully the next time you're on, we talk about something a little bit lighter than all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to talk the serious stuff, and it needs to be talked about. But yeah, we if it can be, yes, some cricket would be nice. I say that it's not that we've not been started cricket, but yeah, you can follow me at Nakul Pande on Twitter, where I am frequently, and Instagram, where I am sometimes, and also got a website, knucklepande.com. Great.
Just a reminder, we're on Patreon, patreon.com/The Cricket Pod if you want stuff. Woodstock Cricket is our sponsor, and you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at The Cricket Pod. Thanks very much for listening. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.